Okay, hello everyone watching online. We're at the Dealey Plaza UK conference 2022, October the 2nd, and I'm talking to Malcolm Blunt for the upteenth time. I've lost count, but close to 10 or 12. If I take especially the previous conference talks, we're probably hitting 15.
Are we really?
It's getting close to that, yeah. We arrived Friday night together from the bus journey from London, and we were talking, what on earth are we going to talk about? I don't have a clue. But as usual, since it's the document God, what we're going to talk about? Documents as such. Let's talk about what you know about documents that are very hard to retrieve, very hard to get hold of. I mean, we spoke during all these talks that we did, especially in the Cotswolds at your house, but you know, a lot has been lost and so forth.
Sure.
And then you said on Friday you mentioned something about the HSCA. And I find it overall very hard to get some sort of oversight of some sort where you can say that, well, this is what's there and we can look at this and so forth. Then you mentioned this particular document from the HSCA.
Right.
Please tell us about that.
Yeah, can I turn it upside down?
How?
Because I've been getting a lot of requests from our American cousins about how far I am with the Veciana research.
Right.
Antonio Veciana. I'm coming up now 7 years working on Mr. Veciana, and I think it's been the most difficult research I've ever done on him, because he's such an opaque personality. You know, he talks a lot, but he tells us nothing. And I think, yeah. So really, where I am with that, this will just take very short.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, one, Antonio Veciana was a bilateral agent. That means he worked for two agencies. He worked for CIA and he worked for Army Intelligence. He was a bilateral agent for a number of years. The information we got from CIA was that he was handed over to the Army in 1962, January 1962, which is incorrect. That was a falsification on the files, and a provable falsification. So we know that Mr. Veciana was of some interest, despite the denials that come from the agency, from CIA in particular. And so the second part, I think, is a confirmation in my mind, which needs some further work, that David Atlee Phillips was the person that recruited Antonio Veciana, despite what other people say recently, in recent times. He was there, very active with Antonio Veciana, but only until the early part of 1960, when a second case officer took Antonio Veciana over. And that second case officer was probably the person that was ID'd by Veciana, or mentioned by Veciana as being Morris Bishop in Dallas. So the interesting thing I found was the striking resemblance between the second case officer and David Atlee Phillips. So it was very difficult to, you know, separate those two. If you were looking at an image of two people, it's a very strong resemblance either way. You know, the weathered look and all the rest of it. So when Antonio Veciana was taken to the Reston, Virginia retired CIA officers meeting and met up with David Phillips. afterwards, Gaten Fonzie asked the question, you know, is it him? Is it him? That was the question. And Veciana's answer was, no, it's not him, but he knows. And so, this is the typical Veciana statement. But I can see now, you know, with this research, where he was going. He's actually ideating the second case officer. And then obviously pointing at Phillips as the person who knows. So there's a big story there, but it still needs, after 7 years, it still needs more work. Because as I say, Antonio Veciana is not an easy person to do. He says a lot.
This is written about in Gaten Fonzie's book, The Last Investigation.
Yeah.
It's still going on. It will go on for. It's been going on a lower tempo than say the last 2020 and 2021. COVID, of course. I got to thank COVID for that because all the lockdowns, etc. On one way, we only met sporadically and waiting for the government to declare the roads and transportation to be open for travel, and that's when we, especially at first, me and Tony went down there, and then that's Tony Beijing, and later on with Peter Antil, and that's what I've been doing with Peter for at least the last 2 years. We've been about 12 to 15 times, probably average 6-7 times a year, and then especially in the last year, I thought, well, let's do some videos because we'll just chat about the documentation and such, which is roughly what we're doing now as well. The problem I had with this whole enterprise was that I didn't have a clue what I was walking into. That's one thing. Two, originally I was only supposed to do about 4 or 5 months because of the Canterbury premise where the documentation was stashed.
You also started just with the Livingstone collection.
Yeah.
That was it?
Yeah. I was only supposed to do Harry Livingstone.
Yeah, that's right. Then you drifted into...
I know. You were back in the pub and I was in between the documents, and I found all documents where I went, oh, this I want and that I want, and oh, this is really important. And I started finding things that were benefiting me in my work, and which I was working with at that time. And so I said at that point, okay, I'm going to, besides Livingston, I'm going to take some of your stuff with me. That led to something that, especially the spooks, I had no idea what was going on with all this traffic between either the Warren Commission and the CIA, or the HSCA and the CIA, and the ARB and the CIA, and these are all different individuals to deal with. But it's for people that think like, oh, the answers are in those documents. They're not. It's more the mechanics and the lingo between these people as such. Like Scott Breckenridge, for instance, is one person. Can you just tell us a little bit about this lingo and how you learn to read between the lines what they actually mean? Because if I look at a Pentagon report, it's pretty down to earth and pretty clear message as to say, we want this to happen, we want that many guns, tanks, this, that and the other for that to happen in Cuba, blah, blah, blah. But with the Central Intelligence Agency, it's not as direct as people expect it to be. There's a lot of euphemistic language as such.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, Joseph Burkholder Smith was a very heavy CIA guy, very heavy hitter. And he blew the whistle, really, when he was interviewed by Gaten Fonzie. And I think, was it Cliff Fenton, I think? Those two guys interviewed Burkholder Smith. And he emphasized in his interview that the HSCA would have to get, and the investigators would have to get behind the euphemistic language. The CIA was, otherwise it would be an irrelevant exercise. They would have to get behind the disguise language.
How do you do that?
You just stick at it. I mean, you have to sort of like almost focus on. I mean, not long before I came here, for instance, I was working on a component of CIA called, how was it called? The development branch, development. And they use the word development in the context of a component that receives agents coming in from abroad. So they're coming in to CIA, and this is like a holding pen when they come in from CIA. And that was being misused by the agency. Being misused because certain other components were taking people when they were in the development branch and using them off the books. So the holding position, this gets even more complicated because there's another component called the position control branch. In the position control branch, you're supposed to everything an agent does is logged onto the position control branch, and then it's turned into numbers. So everything is like a number. So the guy gets, that's disguised. So they go abroad, they get a number. The station they go into is another number. Their pseudonym is another number. So the whole thing is just totally disguised. It's called actually the Development Complement Branch, which is like a weird section. But getting into the real details of how these various bits of the agency work gives you an awful lot of purchase when you're researching people. Certainly helped me with Veciana. I really got to understand what was going on with Veciana. But you can't do that by just looking at trying to make sense of Veciana's comments. And plus, of course, none of, it's all denied by CIA, the whole exercise. They just say Veciana existed on their books for just about a year. He was recruited as a source of information, as a peripheral contact, and then disposed of to the army, who then say they only used him for a very short space of time and didn't do much, all this baloney, really. We're expected to believe that this guy was a world-class terrorist, sat in a press conference in Washington, D.C. in March '63, talking about attacking Russian ships, is of no interest, or peripheral interest to see. Just nonsense, sheer nonsense. So that stuff, when you talk about disguise, cutting through that disguise, it got me into places with Veciana that I couldn't get into.
Does it make you understand the documentation about him better?
Yeah. You can see behind a lot of when you follow the cable traffic on some of this stuff. It gives a clearer picture. Because you can't do that unless you understand some of the other stuff. You have to get a basics in. It's a big ask for a lot of people, I think, to get into their systems.
Yeah, it's like becoming part of the clique to understand what is actually happening within that clique.
Yeah, but the problem is, I knew Pete Backley, the chief of counterintelligence for 6 years, CIA chief of counterintelligence, and Pete didn't have the slightest clue of what was going on with some of the, even with the next door component, which to him apparently, which was the SR9, which was the Soviet Russia division.
But
Just
so
didn't know that stuff.
that points to a heavy
And then the nuts and bolts, he didn't know the nuts and bolts. I mean, obviously, he knew how to send a cable, to write a cable, to make a cable. And he knew very well how to write a cable. I mean, that's drummed into CIA officers that you have to use euphemistic language when you do this stuff. And like everybody seems to be able to, that's in a club, seems to understand it, you know. If you're not in it, you don't get it.
And on top of that, it's heavy compartmentalized as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So now I just want to go back to the original question about the Scott Breckovich and the HSCA, like mainly.
He was a gatekeeper.
Robert Blake.
Yeah, he was a gatekeeper for the CIA. It was in a component called the Office of Legislative Council. He was the chief.
OLC.
OLC, and really any stuff that came in which was difficult to deal with was shuffled across to Scott Breckenridge. It was the end of the line, but the person in between, not in the first year or so, but in the second year at the HSCA was George Joe and Ingris. And
we all know what
particularly on the Cuban stuff. I mean, he was the guy that was like shutting off stuff, and he was certainly shutting off researchers like Dan Hardway and Eddie Lopez for the HSCA. They said they found they were not getting the stuff that they should have got, and that was all part of the game, And
them not knowing that actually Joe and Edie's was that closely connected to the whole thing.
Not at all. I mean, that didn't come out until later.
Yeah.
And then you get G. Robert Blakey saying, well, they lied to me. Yeah, okay. I believe that.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of difference decades after. I mean, you
No.
say like, you could be pissy about it.
Mm.
What's his name? Dick Helms and the Warren Commission. What kind of connection was that? Because in one way they gave them information, but at the same time they held a ton back, especially when it comes to
Cuba.
Yeah, like it didn't exist, like it wasn't happening.
Well, yeah, the way they dealt with that was like, they weren't going to give anything they weren't asked for. It's as simple as that. They didn't see that as being relevant.
And not really relevant.
An early form of NBR,
Yeah,
not really relevant.
It's been a term that's been used in the 90s a lot. Now when we talk about the ARB, I don't know too much about it, so that's why this question's been open. What can you tell us about the interactions between the agency and the ARB from that time?
It's pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah,
something positive.
Yeah, it's something positive. The relationship, well, you have to go to who the part of CIA that the review board was dealing with was the Historical Review Group, which was formed in 1992, I think, as a result of Director Gates, Robert Gates, probably in response to the Stone film, the JFK film that Oliver Stone.
J. Barry Harrelson?
Yeah. Let me think about the original. Yeah, I think. Who came first? Yeah, J. Barry Harrelson was the first person in charge of that, I think, and then he was followed by John Pereira. In the relationship, I mean, I think if there was any component of CIA that was cooperative with a government body that's trying to get documents released, I think it was the Historical Review Group. They really did put some effort in. I mean, obviously, they were under a lot of pressure from the Directorate of Operations not to release a lot of stuff on Mexico City, which was to do with mainly intercepts and stuff like that, and wiretapping, and they were reluctant to give over some of the facts that the CIA was bugging everybody in Mexico City. Everybody.
I mean,
Even friends and foe alike, everybody was booked. That's right. And their relationship with obviously the Mexican security services, that was a big no-no. They tried to, and I think that there's an element of that that still exists today. They're very reluctant to give up their intergovernment intelligence relationships. But you don't have to be a genius to work out it was a very close relationship with the Mexican security services.
Yeah. I mean, I never knew, but I only found out during the course of digitizing your archive is actually how much documentation there is on Mexico City as such. Not just the feds, but the DOJ and the State Department, and then of course the Central Intelligence Agency.
And that's a tiny, tiny snapshot because, I've got this sort of hatred of Mexico City. I don't like to go there.
You said it's a swamp.
It's a swamp, yeah. And John Newman, of course, my friend John Newman, told me it's a swamp I've got to get into. I've never subscribed to that. I almost see it as like a diversion, and I've never really. I mean, I've copied stuff, as you've seen, but not so much for me, but for other people.
Yeah. I mean, I shared it to quite a few individuals, and I was like, "You lot can figure that puzzle out because I'm not getting involved." But the bits that I did read, the whole Laredo thing already, especially of Oswald being on that bus and hanging about, this, that, and the other, but there's very little support in the shape of evidence for that actually happening as such.
Yeah, the very early documents are really fascinating on the journey, on the alleged Oswald journey, how he got into Mexico City and how he exited.
The bus stop.
Just an enormous. Can I swear?
Yeah, of course.
Clusterfuck.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. All over the place.
Yeah.
They just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
The first 24, 48 hours. They're trying to get this story right. They can't get it. They can't get it. And you can see it in the documents.
Yeah. I mean, one of the documents was an FBI document where basically the FBI agents listened to the tapes on the evening of November 22nd and went right away, that's not Oswald, it's bullshit, there and then. That already, and of course that document was deep sixed for quite some time, although in between like forum posts and maybe you mentioned in a book here or there, but it was kind of enlightening to see the document.
The guy that took the tapes was Eldon Rudd, and he denied up and down he ever took any tapes. And later on, when the HSCA was sitting, they tried to get Eldon Rudd to appear and testify, and he refused because at that time he was a congressman. Congressman Eldon Rudd absolutely refused. You've got that document in the refusal in there in the collection.
Yeah.
They wrote it down and they said, apparently if you work for, if you're a congressman or a senator, you're not obliged to testify. So,
I mean, I
couldn't sit him down and nail him.
Yeah. I mean, for me, from all the stuff that I went through in your collection, I think the FBI documents are the best, or the most telling, let me just say that. And that's because the fact that it's just a very serious bureaucratic organization and just actually write everything down as such. And they probably try to get rid of things, but on the other hand, there's still stuff that has come out, and for me, the finds that I found, but also relating to other things, fair play for Cuba, or other things, and go, if you want telling stuff that will help you in your research, the FBI for me is the way to go, because them being such a bureaucratic organization, and they don't talk in euphemistic language as the Central Intelligence Agency does. I mean, that was much, I don't get that vibe as such.
And those early documents are quite, I think, could be important for people doing research because of the, as you say, the bureaucratic process where you turn the document over and the timestamp, date stamp, and then you can work out where they went and who they went to.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
the
you
time-
sent me one of those documents,
Yeah, the
and it was
timing-
littered with stamps on the back.
Yeah, the timings are so important, I think.
Yeah,
It
they
could
tell a
be
story.
very important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they tell the story, and of course all the scribbles in between. Some of the documents are basically mutilated with stamps and scribbles in that sense. Yeah.
Hoover scribble.
Yeah.
Which is
And Tolson and yeah, all these guys, all the top guys.
Yeah.
And then of course what people also need to understand is that there are Dallas files, but there's also Washington files, and there is a difference in the sense that
There's a big difference, you know. There's a lot of well, you get the general files, which are a lot of files. You know, JFK investigation, and the 89 files, the 105 files, the 100 files, and these are big, quite big collections on their own. But then you go into field office files, and that's massive. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boxes, field office files. But the most important field office is the Washington Metropolitan Field Office, because they were the people that were right at the top of everything. You know, they were especially interested in anything that was controversial or sensitive, political stuff. They were really into all that stuff. So that's a really good set of files to look at. WMFO, the Washington Metropolitan Field Office.
since we're talking FBI files, what are bulkies?
The bulkies, yeah, bulkies are a fantastic resource. And when I first went to the archives, they weren't present. You know, they had every other finding aid, everything was in paper. So like you go through the 3-ring binders and you find your way through, and it's pretty good. You find your way FBI files. Mainly, early on, I was looking at FBI files exclusively, nothing else. And then I don't know. Somebody mentioned the name Ivan Conrad to me, who was in charge of the FBI labs. And so there was a new girl in the archives, new archivist. And I said to her, you know, somebody's mentioned Ivan Conrad. And she said, we got those boxes. 6 boxes. They're in the bulkies, FBI bulkies. Never heard of it. It's not in the finding aids. Anyway, that whole finding aid still didn't find its way into the research room at NARA at all. They didn't let go of it. And then the review board pushed their stuff out, and I went through the review board files, and in the best resource was Ron Harron, who came from the Department of Justice into the review board, and he looked at everything, and then he copied everything, and everything went into his file. Well, and there was the bulkies index, the FBI bulkies index, and so I got that, and I was able to, and it's a marvelous resource for so many things.
I read some of it. We discussed it yesterday. We were in our room and we were discussing, and all of a sudden I was like, do I have this? And I checked my database basically with it, and it's a 64-page document, and it's gold nugget after gold nugget when it comes to media or documentation.
So much in there.
It's amazing.
It's an unbelievable resource.
It's my first source if I'm ever going to investigate it now, and that's my thing. Basically, to dig in.
Especially from your point of view, because there's so much photographic stuff in there.
Yeah.
You know, you get
It's amazing. Negatives and
negatives. Yeah.
That original stuff, basically.
Original stuff.
Yeah.
And well, eventually they did put it into the research room. So after seeing that I had a copy of it, it suddenly appeared. So, and then later John Hunt came and did a lot of research in those files, in the bulky files, a lot of good research. And a couple of other people dug into it, but really it's a resource that's not used, really.
But I find this the case overall with when it comes to, here are people researching for a book and spend maybe a day or two at NARA, and of course get very frustrated by the process that it actually involves. It's incredibly frustrating. I had a friend of mine go in there trying to obtain some negatives from from NARA, and the first time he just came across it just like that, innocently, and then while trying to get back into it, it just proved such a laborious process of just getting access to it again. And he gave up, and he called it a crock of shit, just the way it just went down there, and it's incredibly frustrating. You've documented before that, to me, previous interviews, that you said they're not as generous as they used to be when it comes to amounts.
No, back when the review board was sitting, that was the golden age. Of course, we never knew, we just take things for granted, but that was when they really cooperated with researchers at the National Archives. And they were proactive for a few years when the review board was sitting. Then everything went back to the old ways after the review board went out. They went back to their usual sloth-like stuff, difficult. I mean, there are some individual archivists that were very helpful. James Mathis particularly was very helpful to me initially. Although we had a major frank exchange of views to do with the Warren Commission. In 2004, James did a massive interfile into the Warren Commission files. Massive. And this was going on very quietly. I didn't know about this until afterwards. So when I discovered that, I said to him, "Where's the index? You've got all these new interfiles, all these previously withheld documents, and you've shoved them into the files. Where's the index?" Oh, he said, "There's no index." I said, "Do you mean I've got to go through 440 boxes to look for the new stuff again?" And he said, "Well, you can make a negative template. You can go onto our website, see everything that's withdrawn, and then make your own index." So there you go. That's really helpful. It's really helpful. But I mean, I guess he was like hesitant, because I actually got him when he first appeared at the archives. The CIA segregated files from microfilm. They came in and there was no index. And so I really did bitch about that. I really complained about that. And he eventually provided an index. Get this, 24 boxes of riffs for those files. 24 boxes. He didn't do a proper index.
So you just put the riffs in there?
It put the riffs in there. So you have to go, but at least it's not through hundreds of boxes. It's only 24 boxes. So that's the sort of stuff you have to deal with at the National Archives. It's not an easy process.
No.
It's not user-friendly.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Yesterday, when Larry Schneff was speaking to us, you had a little, at the end of the conversation, you had a few questions, this, that, and the other. You were mentioning the HSCA files or HSCA index. Some of it is redacted. What else can you tell us about this?
Yeah, that's a real strange one, because I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure it's 3 boxes, 3 grey file boxes, which are like this. And it's their document register. It's where everything was recorded.
Was done,
Yeah, everything was recorded. Everything that came in, all the people they interviewed, all sorts of stuff, letters, any amount of stuff, memos, and it's horrendously redacted. And I asked at the National Archives, like, why is this redacted? You don't get wishy-washy replies. Nobody seemed to know who was doing the redacting of that. I mean, there must be, I would think, an agency hand in there, really. The CIA hand.
Well, this is basically to prevent, to know what's actually available from a documentary point of view, like the collection itself. Yeah? I mean, can't see it any other way. Because the HSCA went a lot further than most people actually tend to think. Because, you know, especially at first, there wasn't that much documentation. I mean, from the 90s onwards, stuff was getting released as such. But there's tons more.
Yeah, I think within those files, you know, if we could get access to the complete index, then I think a lot of it would probably be witnesses that we could read ask for their statements, their testimony and stuff like that, which we haven't seen yet. Although, to be fair, I think they've increased the boxes, the number of files, the HSCA number of files. I mean, you've got a lot of those documents. Where they were 302 boxes, so they're now around 320, I think. So there's an 18-box increase to look at.
It's just been stuffed in and
interfiled, yeah. That's the
basically have to, like it's just
stuffed in.
You just have to go through it all over again and basically compare it with what was there before.
Yeah, that reminds me when you say stuffed in. You know, one of the best set of files was the Warren Commission files, entry number 44. Entry number 44 are the office files of stuff, where you get Slauson's notes, you know, all the Liebler's notes, you get all these guys, all these staffers, all their handwritten notes. And there used to be quite large boxes, there was not much in them. And then during obviously the interfile process that James Mathis did,
Loads was added on.
you know, they're so stuffed, you know, they're really heavy. They're stuffed full of, you know, all the stuff they've redacted. You know.
It's,
I went through Slauson's files, and they were very interesting files.
we've got some.
Yeah, but the problem was they changed the paper at NARA. This is a technical detail for you. They changed the paper to a pale blue. And a lot of Slauson's writing is in pencil. You try and copy that stuff
Grey
on
and
this
blue.
blue paper.
Yeah. Because for black and white reproduction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it needs to be
similar.
white paper.
It's like writing on red paper, same thing, yeah. On this note, we're going to happily end this conversation.